Welcome to Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. And today, Tal Seaman and I, my co-host, will be speaking with Craig Bennett. He is the Deputy CFO and the Chief Risk Officer at the U.S. Coast Guard. Craig, good morning and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Paul.
And we also have Tal Seaman here, our co-host.
Good morning.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the Coast Guard's risk management program. So let's start off with, I think what's a little bit unique about you all, where Craig, you are actually considered the Chief Risk Officer, but you're also the Deputy CFO and as well. So
Correct.
Just to talk a little bit about that dual role, does that work for you guys? Or do you envision that being the long-term way that you want to do this?
So I would say that it's working for us right now, and I tried lightly with the Chief Risk Officer title. The Vice Commandant designated me as that. And that's primarily due to kind of the legacy stance that in the CFO's office, we own the management control program for the Coast Guard. And so for a number of years, we've been working through the audit and putting in internal controls to get a clean opinion on, the financial statement audit, internal control over financial reporting. In recent years, we've added internal controls over operations. Mm-hmm. And we were actually ahead of A123 in trying to get the program managers across the Coast Guard, not just the finance and logistics people, to look at their program and how they're managing their program. Every program's a business, right? So,
right.
There's existence and valuation of property, but other programs, what's your mission objective? What's your outcome? Mm-hmm. So historically, those kind of big programmatic, the mission risks of the Coast Guard, saving lives, cleaning up oil spills, were run by what I'd say was our Deputy Commandant for Operations, the 3-star kind of over headquarters, the programs for operations for search and rescue and law enforcement at sea and environmental protection, and that was generally managed through the GIPRA process. So they would have the mission, the big picture mission things that OMB wanted us to achieve, and they would report on that. That was really, in a way, a risk management process. And now with the new 123, we've got a language that we use in the CFO community, so right. We're kind of trying to bring them in. We're not changing what they do, and really operations should own those risks. So that's why I say I tread lightly. I don't want him to think I'm trying to own those risks, because
right.
He's the one that owns that and has to be accountable to the Commandant for that. But to the degree we've got processes for identifying risks, measuring them perhaps, and then taking action on them, mm-hmm. and a vernacular, and keeping with A123, we're kind of helping grow it. So do I think it's long term? I think I'm a placeholder, frankly. Mm-hmm. I think long term risk management should be somewhere maybe even higher in the organization. But I think in the interim, being in the CFO shop's working for us to help get everybody kind of using the same language and the same way ahead.
Right.
All right, so Craig, you're one of the few agencies in the federal government that get to have their internal controls audited regularly.
And thank you, Congress.
And in terms of the Enterprise Risk Management Program, like you said, your program kind of grew out of the management controls. So the two questions are, does that annual audit on your controls, does that actually help or does that hurt the implementation of ERM throughout the agency? And the second thing is, you're talking about process. Do you guys have an enterprise risk management guide that lays out a framework that standardizes across mission support, and enterprise level issues, how we do this?
So your first question, I think all this process and ERM is helping us in our internal controls. It's at first we're a little nervous. Do people really want to be open kimono? Because if there's this anxiety out there that if you start talking about your risk, you're just giving the IG next year's work list, right? But
mm-hmm.
but I think the IGs are sensitive to that and working with the agencies. And in our case, it is what it is. So if it's out there, you better be talking about it and looking at it. Otherwise, you're caught flat-footed later if you're, if something does happen. So it's been a healthy, I think, evolution in that respect. I don't think it's hurting us, and we're really kind of getting everybody in the organization because my risk of getting a clean audit opinion versus the operator's risk of saving lives, and maybe the logistician's risk of being able to keep aircraft flying through so many hours. The challenge is how do you compare those risks and how do you treat them all the same? And so that's where we're kind of getting a common language. So getting your risk tolerance and risk appetite across all those things aligned, mm-hmm. I think, is the aspirational part of where we're moving. But at least we're using the same language and the same processes. We are using our annual statement of assurance process to now, to get to Tal's point, second point is the annual statement of assurance process is used to basically come up with our risk register. So instead of the statement of assurance that the Commandant signs off just talking about the risk to the financial statement or our internal control program, we're including operational risks in that, and those bubble up to the top, and it's an iterative process. Each layer, at the 2-star program level, then we get to the 3-star admiral, deputy commandant for mission support and operations. We're kind of the facilitators in the CFO shops. I'm not deciding what the risks are. They're pushing up their risks, and then they meet with the vice commandant who chairs all this. Our vice commandant is really the chief operating officer and really owns the risk. I'm just kind of the facilitator on his behalf. So we vet all that, and then annually the commandant now this will be our second year. The commandant will, with the statement of assurance sign off, include all risks across the board.
So actually going back to that, you do have, obviously your operational risks in there. I mean, everything should be included that makes sense. So how do you prioritize at the end of the day, get that big list down to a smaller?
Like your slides had 352. And like they say, if it's all important, nothing's important.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. So obviously being an armed force and an operational component with a lot of dangerous activities, flying helicopters, launching ships. Usually it's not good weather when you're asked to do that. We've got a culture of risk, I'll say risk with a little r, risk management that's embedded in our operational ethos. And so everybody from a junior petty officer to the commandant has lived their career thinking about risk, doing a little checklist, doing a mental countdown before they get into an operation. So it's kind of in our DNA, if you will. To get that to the big ERM standpoint, we asked the program. So again, it's not the CFO deciding this or me as the chief risk officer. We work at the program level at headquarters, the 2-star program manager. In lower levels, the field districts and even unit commands are doing their own risk thing. But for the most part, that's not what we're talking. But the program manager is soliciting the field for what are you out there, what keeps you up at night, what are your concerns. And at the program manager level, we're using our management control processes to educate them. They use those processes, they use those terminologies to come up with their own, maybe hundreds of risk items. Within the CFO's office, we've got probably 100, our own internal work list is done through this risk process. So we've probably got 150, but only a handful would we push up to a conversation at the next level above us.
So who does that?
Yeah.
Do you have a body, like a board that does that?
That's a great question. We facilitate a process as it's moving up from the hundreds of risks to get to the like I said, the commandant signed off on our risk register that had 45 risks that were brought to his awareness.
So that's like your profile. That's your agency.
That's sort
profile.
of our agency profile on capital ERM. And the board that does that, and this is really important, I think, for the Coast Guard culture and our success, is we call it our EMC ARC, which is Executive Management Council Audit, Risk, and Compliance. And that evolved out of, we started a few years ago when we started tackling the audit, and we needed tone from the top. Everybody knows that. And we had that in the Coast Guard, and that's what made us successful more than anything else that we did was tone from the top. So we started an EMC ICAR, which is the Executive Management Council for Internal Controls and Audit Remediation. It was met monthly. It was chaired by our Vice Commandant. Usually we had the CFO of the department that would participate. Next to the Vice Commandant were the 3-star admirals and the 2-star program managers that were all at headquarters. They met monthly, and it wasn't driven by the CFO. They were having to, at first CFO, we were doing the briefings and educating people and kind of keeping track of the corrective action plans. But very quickly we turned this over to the programs, the chief information officer, the chief engineer, the chief of operations. We're briefing the vice on, for the audit, here's the things we're working on. Here's where we're red, green, yellow, and the vice would ask them, do you need resources? Do you need more leadership incentive? So knowing that they had to brief that out kind of lit a fire and made it real to everybody, and we made tremendous progress. So we've evolved that now.
That's good.
We're kind of people like that. Some of my peers like to say, hey, since we passed the audit a few times, can we just take a B in the audit and take those resources and put them towards operations or airplanes? And I try to explain it, and Tal's laughing. It's not quite that easy to just take a B and move on. But what I like to say is we're kind of up on our skis on the audit. We're moving forward, so we really don't view ourselves at remediation anymore, but we're at sustainment. And every year, if you live in the audit world, they peel back the onions and the auditors find more and more stuff. So it actually gets a little more harder in some ways because you're getting into the stickier stuff, but it's healthy. But we've kind of renamed that board from the ICARB to the ARC, audit risk in recognition of the ERM aspect,
Right.
and controls.
Yeah, the inside joke was I used to work with Craig when we had 3 disclaimer opinions. We were trying to get the momentum rolling towards audit. So as he said that, it made me laugh. Anyways,
It worked. We've had
so
tremendous success.
Yes, and your executive board is where you sort through to come up with your profile of about 45 risks across operational, mission support, and then entity like reputational and futuristic issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, we saw in your you had a presentation at ASMC, was it a few weeks ago, right?
A couple weeks ago, yeah.
And you meant, and on there you include the black swan, so that's always something that's of interest to ERM folks. I mean, so you quantify that. That's like 20-something% of your risk, concentration. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So as we're doing this dance of bringing the operators over to the dark side of using our language in A123, which is a challenge because because I want to be chosen to roll out through A123, and I understand why, because we've been doing this kind of style controls, but it almost instantly gets viewed as a compliance issue with green eye. So there's some sort of almost instant resistance to like, what, Craig, you're just bothering me. It's another thing I got to check the box on. But what we're trying to do is explain to the operators, no, this is a process. This is what keeps you up at night. So when you talk risk, and risk management, you've got to identify the risk, you've got to measure it somehow, and then you've got to decide what action you're going to take, or if you're going to accept the risk, or if you're going to transfer it to somebody else. But there's all those different things you can do with risk. If you're not doing those 3 things, you're not doing risk management. And if you know you've got bad things that can happen out there, like oil spills and search and rescue and law enforcement things, you need to be thinking about that. So we're helping the operators to think about those things that they've always dealt with, but in terms of using the risk management language and the ERM language. The hard part is reconciling, logistic. Oh, go ahead, After.
Yeah, just stop real quick, because you're talking about you brought in a lexicon to make it common across mission support and mission areas, and it looks like you spent some time and effort to do that. How important is it to have a common language for ERM across your agency?
Right. So this is where the compliance part comes in a little bit, and I'm still kind of wrestling with it. So I think it's important, and I think it's so far it's been good. We the risk of a major oil spill, like a Deepwater Horizon, who knew you could punch a hole in the floor of the Gulf of Mexico and it would run for 90 days, and you'd have the biggest man-made pollution event in the history of the planet. But those things happen. So to your point, Tal, the black swan comment, those are the really important things that the Coast Guard is always trying to be ready for, right? And so those are things we want to think about, but they're easy to identify. They're a little harder to measure and quantify. They're very high impact, but they're low probability. So how much, when it comes to your action, you're going to think, how much resources are we really going to push to preparing for another Deepwater Horizon,
right?
Or do we need to, versus pushing money towards, making sure we've got enough helicopter parts in the dust bins to keep the helicopters flying if there's another hurricane. So but to your point, Tal, these first 2 rounds where we're including the operators, about a third of the risks that are relevant for the commandant to look at are those big operational risks. So we're still wrestling with maybe the action, what you do, but at least we're identifying, at least we're trying to quantify. And then the big so what to me is the green eye shade bean counter for the Coast Guard is where are we putting our money, right? And I think this is really the big so what for ERM writ large is, if it's not changing where money goes, why am I wasting my time doing it? Because to me, ultimately, where the agency is choosing to put its money is where the agency's priorities are. So what I view ERM as a way of helping have a conversation across the organization, across things as disparate as logistics and operations. And we're finding that this is influencing our PPBE process, right? So we're using this risk. Last year's risk register is used to inform the governance process within Coast Guard headquarters as to what is this year's resource planning guidance that we send out to start prepping for the fiscal year 21 budget build, which we're kind of ramping up for now. How do we influence that? What risks did we identify last year that maybe we're not sure we're taking the right action. Either they're not resourced adequately, or we're accepting it, but we're not sure we should. So do we need to take a deeper dive in the budget bill process for 21?
Yeah.
And that to me makes ERM meaningful.
So just to follow up on the black swan, Craig, when you guys say this is a black swan, what criteria do you apply so that folks understand this fits into that category? And it seems like the Coast Guard, part of their job is to be the black swan warden out in the maritime environment, because when something bad happens, you out in the sea, whatever it is, the spills, the mass migrations, the tankers running aground, or
It's
the
like Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call?
yeah, who are you going to call it?
Coast
So
Guard.
you guys are like
Right.
the black swan people. So how do you define it?
Yeah.
So I would say, we're using that categorization as a way of educating, I think, because when you say black swan, senior management kind of understands that. And that's the stuff they care about. I don't expect the senior operators to care that much about whether I pass the audit or not. They know I have to, and the operators shouldn't be caring too much about how their mission support. They know when they need to push the throttle down, the cutter should go forward fast, and when they pull the collective
What
up.
is it?
So black swan is I think would say is generally operational, something is hard to predict. A lot of the internal stuff, logistics, we know when things are going to break on a helicopter or ship based on op hours and usage and the conditions. But I would say it's the external threats that when are you going to have a mass migration of maybe illegal immigrants coming because of political instability somewhere in Central America, or when are you going to have a big oil spill? We do routine oil spills all the time, but when are you going to have that big one that requires you to surge all the boom in the nation to a single location to respond to it? That's sort of the big operational things that I would say are very high impact, very low probability. So they may not necessarily have the resources in place. So you got to dance real quick when they happen. And how do you respond to them?
So like more planning is your guys' normal mitigation response to that,
Or I mean, think about, is it training? I mean, training folks to be able to react to something, or is it? I mean, it's not just a big pot of money available for anything. Right. It's for what kind of things? How do you prepare for these things? Or
right. So the black swan identifier, if you will, that 30% of our high level ERM things are identified. Those are identified as really, I would say, those are the mission risks operationally.
Okay.
And then the mitigation things, or the action items that we take to prepare for them, again, by identifying those and making sure on the ERM risk register, then we can look at them and we can think about, do we need to get the training folks involved? Is it a training? Is a problem we need training, or you need better tactics and procedures, or we need better partnerships? There's something where we need to have partnerships with EPA or Interior or NOAA to deal with a certain maritime threat. Do we need legislation? It can identify something that the weakness is, if we had some different authorities, or if we had a different regulatory regime, we could manage this. So all those are the actions you take to address the risks. So using ERM to look at those black swan things, it's not a CFO issue, but it's more the programmatic issue. And some would say, we're already doing those things. And we are in many respects and doing them well. Yeah. But this kind of brings that world of work and aligns it across. So from a resource standpoint, the next dollar on margin's going to the most important issue.
Well, let's get back to that. So the resourcing and the PPBE, obviously that sounds like you'd be getting closer to your optimized maturity level, so to speak, of using ERM. So, I mean, today, how would you say, to what extent do the folks that are making these budget decisions are using the risk register, so to speak, or how's that work today, and how do you see things going forward?
So I think we're still in the formative stage. I think at the staff level, it's growing across the board. People are aware, and because at the staff level, you're always worried about all these things. So we're getting common language, and throughout the building at Coast Guard headquarters, people are using the language, and we're helping from a management control standpoint. We're helping them. If they identify a risk, whether it's an external mission risk or an internal logistics risk, helping them work on how do you quantify that? How do you put in internal controls to measure when you're getting out of tolerance for what you said you could accept? Whether so that is kind of happening from the bottom up.
Okay.
Top down, I think it's they pulse in. Once a month we have the ARC and people talk about it, and then they go back and do their day job. So I think it's going to be over time. It's going to mature, which is why I think over time I could see the chief risk officer evolving from the CFO shop to somebody maybe in operations, and we would be supporting with the kind of the technical side.
Well, what about OMB examiners and your DHS, Department of Homeland Security budget examiner that you guys formulate budgets with? Are profiles moving up the chain beyond the agency to support formulation?
Yeah, so I don't know if, well, I would say it's probably supporting formulation, at least that's the intent. So the A123 requirement that came out last year for the first time, we had to include a risk register in the fiscal year, was it 20? Budget, maybe it was 1920 budget submission, needed to include a risk register, right? So a lot of people are like, and that's when the first discussions about, holy cow, I'm sending OMB a risk register, and the IG is going to get it, and does that just become their work list? So
that's
so we
fantastic.
It is. No, that's a foresight
good
function. So that's kind of why we're using our existing statement of assurance process, which is tied to the PPBE process, reaching out to encompass the operational side of things. And it's, there's the whole, for everybody, enterprise risk management is an evolution, and we're probably just to the left of center of where we think we'd like to be on that evolutionary process. And I would say we're probably ahead of a lot of the federal government in that respect. Yeah. And we're okay with that. I think OMB knows even in WIC 23, they knew it was going to be an iterative, just get started, just start talking about risk. So that first risk register is probably going to look very different. It probably had training wheels on it. We probably didn't put anything that was going to be, cause lightning from the sky to strike us. Right. But we're getting people comfortable with putting things on there. OMB will have that to look at what the department's funding is, and they'll have all the components risk registers, and OMB can look and see, does this make sense? And then the president will have their priorities from an administration standpoint. And then when it goes, I don't know when it goes to Congress if OMB will pass that on. I presume they will. So Congress will have that to look at as well.
Now, you mentioned OIG twice. All right. Now, a lot of agencies, when they have the registers and you have your identification and description and your assessment on there, programs are naturally concerned that this will be the stick that they are handing OIG to hit so that OIG can hit them with it. And so that I understand different programs have language and that determine that program risk registers below the executive approved profile, everything below it is pre-decisional management information because it changes and can change daily. Therefore, it's not subject to FOIA, and therefore it's not subject to audit. Do you guys have anything like that in your policy? Have you worked anything out with DHS, OIG?
So that's a good point. And I said OIG and not OIG, GAO, or any of the other acronyms because OIG is kind of internal. So OIG, GAO, we have a good relationship with all of them. We're a big enough agency. We've got lots of back and forth. We've got lots of audits going at any time. So these concerns relate to both. I said OIG because, to your point, what do you share, what do you not share? We follow A11, which says anything pre-decisional is not subject to external. So from a GAO standpoint, it's maybe a little less threatening because we can always say, this is pre-decisional, so until the budget is submitted, because this information is being used to formulate the budget, it would be too early. The IG, because they're part of the administration, can actually see pre-decisional stuff.
Sure.
So that's why I use them. So there's that risk of them seeing it or taking action on it. So, but we share it. Now we're only going to send them the stuff at the commandant's level because that's where the decision's been made on that year's budget, where it's being made, and we'll share that with the IG. And I think it's an evolving kind of relationship between the oversight bodies. But I would say both GAO and IG have been very careful about helping the agencies feel comfortable that they're not putting themselves,
so the conversations can still be candid and honest and open. Otherwise, it'll shut down.
Yeah, I would say at the staff level, there's conversations that my staff has with OMB or GAO or the Hill that I don't need to know are taking place. It's just a healthy dialogue about what's going on. If we did this, how would you react? So there's a lot of communication that takes place there that's really, I think, healthy for operating government.
All right, so as a leadership tool, a written risk appetite statement by different categories of risk to guide agency leaders in accepting risk or being more aggressive or ambitious in their program performance. Where are you guys at on a written risk appetite statement, and where do you see that going?
So that's a great question because we do not have a written appetite statement, and I rest the whole risk tolerance and then the risk appetite. Because I would say in the federal government, especially in an armed force or a response law enforcement entity, whatever appetite I say, as soon as that black swan event happens, we had too much appetite, right? We're gonna get blamed for accepting the risk if something really bad happens. So it's hard to come up with that appetite. TSA did come up with a risk appetite, and it's AFERM uses it, and it's a good example. I think we would like to get there, but we're probably a couple years from having a good risk appetite. But what I do tell our program managers is, when they start looking at me as the green eye shade guy and about compliance, I point out that the new requirement, we're required to attest to in the statement of assurance effective and efficient operations, compliance with all laws and regulations. So that's not just financial stuff. That's operational stuff, and reliable reports. How do you demonstrate your reliable reporting? It doesn't say reliable financial reporting anymore. It says reliable reporting. So any report a program does to IG, to GAO, annual reports to the public, that's a report. And so the fair question back is, how do you know what you're putting in that report is accurate? So that's where the internal control program processes that we have can help programs to point to say, this is how I know the information I'm using is valid, is correct, is repeatable, and whether or not I'm in tolerances. But to articulate what those tolerances are, we've got a ways to go.
Not on paper yet.
Not on paper yet. Yeah.
So I was curious a little too about just kind of the monitoring activities you do. So you get your risk profile and all that together. You're meeting every month, you said, basically.
Actually, we're going bi-monthly now.
Bi-monthly?
Because we're a little more mature. Yeah.
Okay. So then, how do you guys monitor and keep these things fresh, and that you are taking actions on these things?
So all the way down at each level, the commandant annually is signing the statement of assurance in those conversations. The bi-monthly meetings with the vice commandant, the programs are showing him if they're red, yellow, green on certain, like say, corrective action plans or things that they're addressing, whether it's for audit compliance or for now risk management. We'll be doing that.
Right.
And then below that, we have at the 06 GS15 level, we have monthly SAT meetings where people sit down and talk about these things, and then each headquarters office, like for instance in the CFO's office, we for my office chiefs and their deputies, we meet routinely throughout the year to talk about our business plan. Our business plan is basically our risk register inside the office, and we each of the things that they're facing that's a challenge. Do they choose to accept that? Do they have a mitigation plan? Are they trying to fix it? What do they? What's the corrective action plan to improve it? So we on an ongoing basis within the office do that. So.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I think we got a lot of great insights, and thanks again for coming out. We appreciate it.
Paul Tal, it was my pleasure to be here, and thanks to AGA and everything you do for the financial management community of the government.
Well, why does it just have to be so much fun to talk about risk management? It's just not fair.
It excites me. I don't know if it excites everybody else, but glad to be here, guys.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, that's our show. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. We have many more podcasts coming up in the next few months. So tune right back in at AFERM.org. And you can also suggest speakers and guests. We're happy to take your suggestions, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. And this is Paul Marshall signing out for Risk Chats with AFERM.